I still remember the very moment when my whole world, fragile and carefully built, collapsed not from thunder or lightning, not from a scream, not from a sudden incident, as it happens in the movies, but from a barely discernible, almost innocent squeak. There was a short notification signal on my husband's phone when he was in the shower, and I, not even realizing what I was doing, as if guided by something older than common sense, went to this device lying on the dresser in our bedroom and looked at the screen, still not intending to read anything. There was nothing to check, because I had never been one of those women who rummaged through pockets or looked through correspondence. Having lived with this man for 15 years, I firmly believed in the trust one had suffered, sealed by years and common trials. I believed that our marriage, it is a monolith that has survived storms and thunderstorms. But that evening, even before that squeak, something was already wrong. Something was trembling in the air, as on the eve of a thunderstorm. When the leaves of the trees freeze and the birds stop singing. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. Durant, my husband, a man with an impeccable sense of humor and a neat habit of folding socks in pairs, has begun to change in recent months, at first subtly, delays at work, rare dinners together, then more clearly, meetings on weekends, where, for some strange reason, I was not invited, discussing clients whom I hadn't heard of it before, and then, his new interest in his appearance. Sudden visits to the hairdresser, new shirts, perfume, which he allegedly received as a gift from a colleague, but the bottle was in the drawer of the car, wrapped in a cashier's check from a boutique, too expensive for casual purchase. The phone screen lit up with a soft light, and I saw a preview message, a short line, from his assistant, concise but eerily specific. The reservation at the Aria restaurant has been confirmed for Friday, 2000 hours. She will be delighted with a private booth. These words, written as if without malice, with business neutrality, hit me in the stomach harder than any confession, and I was still trying to tell myself that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, that maybe we were talking about a client, about some important business dinner, but my fingers were already reaching for the phone, and without knowing how, I typed in the password that I knew, of course I knew, the date of our anniversary. And what opened up in front of me was not just a confirmation of dinner, not a casual flirtation, not a fleeting connection, no, it was a whole life, hidden from me, carefully hidden, with messages filled with tenderness, with photos, selfies in the car, coffee shots for two, travel plans, vacations for a future where I wasn't, because Laura was in that future. A woman younger than me, with long hair, a smile that he reportedly adored, and she worked, as it turned out, in the marketing department of his law firm, and yes, she was married, just like him, but no one seemed to care anymore. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching his phone, which now seemed icy in my hands, and I couldn't breathe, as if the air in the room had become thicker, as if the walls had shifted, and all I knew, all I believed in was our house, furnished with such love, our mutual friends, our conversations in the evenings about the future of children, about retirement, about travel. Suddenly it turned out to be a stage set, followed by a completely different performance in which I had no role. "Martina, have you seen my blue tie?" A voice came from the bathroom, ordinary, unremarkable, calm, like a person who does not commit treason, does not ruin lives, does not keep double secrets, and I froze for a second, surprised that I could answer, that my voice was not shaking, that I was saying as if nothing had happened, that I am the second drawer, I said, putting the phone back where it was, as if nothing had changed, even though everything had changed. That night, when he lay down next to me and I could hear his steady, peaceful breathing, I didn't sleep, stared at the ceiling, counting every breath in and out, and fought the urge to turn to him, shake him, demand an explanation, scream, unleash the pain, but something inside, whether pride, whether it was my mind that held me back, whispering that confrontation now was a waste of energy, that the answers, if he gave them, would still be false or half true, and therefore, when he came out of the bedroom in the morning, I served him coffee and kissed him on the cheek, saying, "Good luck with your today." The presentation, he smiled, unaware that I knew there would be no presentation, that instead it would be an evening filled with lies and other people's touches. After he left, for the first time in many years, I did not go to work, taking time off under the pretext of illness, and stayed at home, where, sitting at my laptop, I opened his mail, the one he had not changed access to for years, being confident in my devotion, and in the calendar I found confirmation of dinner, which, according to him, it was a working day, but in fact it was personal. And there is also a correspondence with Lara, with her full signature, Lara Rossetti. After a quick search on social media, I found her handsome husband Felice, the owner of a successful architectural firm, comfortably located in the heart of the city, where the glass facades of buildings reflected the morning light with the same composure with which I now viewed his professional profile and family photos in which Lara, his wife, stood next to him. In an embrace, serene, beautiful, confident in herself and in a world in which, in her opinion, there were no threats. My first impulse was, of course, to call him immediately, dial the number and lay out everything, every detail, every photo, every lie that I read and absorbed like poison, but I stopped myself, knowing that a hysterical phone call would not bring retribution, but only a chaotic outcome, predictable and easy. A refutable one that would give them both a chance to rewrite the truth into a more convenient version of events. No, it required a more subtle, thoughtful, unexpected approach, one that none of them had anticipated, especially not my husband, who used to consider me predictable, soft, and comfortable. I remember sitting at the kitchen island, in the very kitchen where we used to cook breakfast together on Sundays, where he hugged me from behind, whispered to me how much he loved me, where we planned a vacation that never happened, and looked at the cooling coffee when in my head an idea came to me, so clear that it took me a moment to realize that it was my own thought, my will, my voice whispering, if he wanted a special, secret, unforgettable dinner, then he would get just such a dinner. Just a little differently than he imagined it. I even laughed out loud, unexpectedly for myself, and this dull, strange sound echoed through the empty house, which, as it turned out, had long been inhabited not by love, but by the illusion of its presence. I whispered, "Do you want dinner, Durant? I'll arrange a dinner for you that you'll never forget," and, wasting no time, she dialed the restaurant's number. Yes, they had a free table for Friday night, and yes, it was possible to choose a place, referring to the corporate status, without unnecessary questions, and I politely, cautiously, confidently explained that we were interested in exactly the room where important meetings are usually held, preferably in close proximity to a private booth. It was already reserved under my husband's corporate account, and Master Deke agreed without hesitation, professionally, without a shadow of suspicion. The next step was to contact Felice Rossetti, but not directly, not head-on, but in such a way that it looked like an initiative coming from the purest, professional motives. Being a university professor, especially in the field of economics, gave me a significant advantage. I could rightfully offer him participation in a series of open lectures organized by the faculty, and that's exactly what I did, writing a neat letter written in an impeccably businesslike tone, in which I mentioned that his approach to modern urban design aroused the interest of our students, especially graduate students studying sustainable development, and that discussing a possible lecture over dinner would be a great start to a fruitful collaboration. I suggested that we meet on Friday evening, and at the same time mentioned that I had reserved a table at the Aria restaurant if the date suited him. His answer was not long in coming. He was courteous, interested, and completely unaware that his wife, dressed in a carefully chosen dress, would be sitting just a few meters away from him that evening, hiding behind the silk curtain of a private booth next to my husband. As I closed my laptop, I felt something completely change inside me, the old confusion, pain, and stupor in which I spent the first hours after discovering my infidelity disappeared, giving way to a new state, clear, cold, blooded, and purposeful. All these 15 years, I'd been what I was raised to be, supportive, understanding, compliant, giving without reserve, always ready to justify, smooth over, believe, build a bridge, even when it was crumbling under the weight of someone else's lies. But now that I've seen how easily and with what pleasure my husband built to parallel the reality in which he had enough room for love, passion, and plans with another woman, something finally broke, not in me, but in all the illusions that I had kept for so long. The 3 days remaining until Friday dragged on endlessly. I lived in this house like a ghost, wandering through its rooms, pretending to be the same person I was yesterday, the day before yesterday, all these years, and only inside everything was on fire, turning every minute into a test of my endurance. I looked at him, at Durant, the man who now seemed completely different to me, and I couldn't help but notice how he went outside to talk on the phone, how nervously he checked the screen when he thought I couldn't see, how his face changed when a new message arrived, and how quickly he returns to his previous expression as soon as I turn around. At breakfast on Thursday morning, he casually said without looking up from the news on his tablet, "I have dinner with a client on Friday evening. Don't wait. These things always get tightened up. I buttered my toast and nodded with perfect composure. Is this the biggest corporate merger? I asked, and he smiled with relief, nodding. That's right, rejoicing at how easily I accepted everything, not suspecting that at that very moment I already knew that he would not be the only one in the restaurant that night. That's sweet, honey. 15 years of marriage, and he couldn't even spare 30 seconds to portray an interest in my life, let alone in my thoughts or feelings, just in my existence in his world, in a world where, as it turned out, I had long been nothing more than a backdrop, a soft backdrop supporting the illusion of stability. Has it always been like this, or did I, in an effort to maintain our fragile facade of an ideal union, personally cut out his indifference with scissors, filling the voids with excuses, consolations, and faith in the best? That evening, I stood in our dressing room, surrounded by endless rows of shirts, suits, dresses, and shoes, the clothes in which our life together took place, and stared at my reflection in the mirror, coldly, attentively, as if I were a stranger, trying to figure out where I had lost myself. At 40, too, I was still an attractive woman. My thick dark hair was faintly streaked with gray, more a silver spark than a sign of fading. My figure had retained its slimness and elasticity thanks to years of dancing, yoga, and early jogging, but I was not Lara, a 28-year-old with her velvety skin, casual grace, and that carefree radiance that women lose not with age, but with newfound bitterness. I ran my finger over the fine wrinkles at the corners of my eyes and, for a split second, succumbing to weakness, I thought, maybe it's me after all? Maybe he's just tired of me, the way people get tired of the same song. But I immediately pushed the thought away, like chasing away an annoying fly, because I knew it wasn't about the wrinkles, the years, or me. It was about him, his selfishness, his desire to possess everything at once, breaking any vows, overstepping loyalty and destroying trust, as if it were a paper bridge, not a set of inviolable vows. I was by his side when he took the first steps in his career. I moved for him, changed cities, left friends, started life anew. I held his hand when his father was dying of cancer. I forgave forgotten anniversaries, cold looks, late returns from work, justifying them with fatigue, obligations, by tension. And so, for all this, gratitude in the form of other people's lips, touches, lies. Friday came as if in silence, clear, dry, soberingly crystal, without a single shadow of doubt. I dressed with the precision of a surgeon. The dark blue dress hugged my figure, emphasizing the waistline and the curve of my hips, but without crossing the line of what was appropriate. It spoke not of temptation, but of dignity, of the right to be visible. I chose the pearl earrings Durant had given me for my 10th anniversary, a subtle reminder, an almost imperceptible symbol, and red high-heeled shoes that he didn't like, saying I was trying too hard to impress in them. Today, I didn't care what he thought. I left work early to go to the salon. Light waves framed my face, giving softness to my features, and the stylist, looking at me in the mirror, noticed that I looked very calm. If only she knew what kind of storm I'm holding under my skin. When I got home, I packed a small bag, not a suitcase, not a demonstrative gesture, but a quiet manifesto, a sign that no matter how the evening ended, I would no longer stay in this house, under this roof, with this man. The Aria restaurant greeted me with dim lights and the rhythmic whisper of dishes. I arrived half an hour before the scheduled time, long enough for all the details to be in place. The head waiter, refined and restrained, greeted us with a slight half-smile, as if we were old acquaintances connected not by words, but by tacit understanding. He showed me the layout of the room, pointed to my table. The place was chosen perfectly, with an accurate viewing angle to the private booth where Durant was supposed to have dinner with Lara. They won't see me right away unless they start turning their heads around looking for familiar faces. Your guest is already called. Confirm that he is on his way, the head waiter said, and I nodded, hiding my tension behind a sip of martini, taking a seat at the bar, turning into an observer, a predator, waiting for the moment. He was the first to arrive. Durant. 15 minutes earlier is a habit developed over the years, to stay a little ahead. He looked immaculate in the same dark gray suit that I helped him choose when he got a contract with an international firm. His movements betrayed nervousness. He looked at his watch, checked his phone, adjusted his cuffs. They escorted him to a booth, and he immediately took out his phone, as if he wanted to hide behind it from reality itself. And then she came. Lara. And from that moment on, the world around seemed to have changed texture. She stepped inside as if she were entering her own space, confident, well-groomed, dangerous in her youth. The red dress fit her perfectly, emphasizing everything that was her and wasn't me. My husband stood up, his eyes shone, his lips stretched into a smile that made everything inside me stop. He took her hands in his, approached, and I saw him inhaling her scent, bending down for a kiss, light, intimate, the kind that is not done in public. And that's when I realized it wasn't just cheating. It's a substitute. He was happy. He was pleased. He was alive in a way he hadn't been with me in years. Martina Hamilton. I turned around and saw Felice Rossetti standing next to me. In his early 40s, he possessed that solid, restrained attractiveness of a man who was confident in himself and no longer needed anyone's approval for a long time. His movements were soft but precise, his voice was velvety low, and his gaze was warm, attentive, with that shade of caring concern that no amount of money could buy. Money. His dark hair with barely noticeable gray at the temples did not add to his age, but only emphasized his maturity and experience. His eyes, brown, almost amber, sparkled with sincere interest when he met my gaze. His smile was exactly what a man's smile should be at that age, calm, confident, and truly kind. "Mr. Rossetti," I managed, holding out my hand, and despite the tension, I could even smile a little. "Thank you so much for agreeing to meet in such a short time." "Please call me Felice," he replied with a slight nod, and his handshake, warm, firm, sincere, unexpectedly brought me a drop of comfort, as if I had touched something real and genuine for a moment. "Your suggestion of a lecture series is intriguing," he continued, and if only he knew how layered this evening was, how carefully this theater stage was built, where every gesture mattered. At that moment, the waiter came up to us and, bowing slightly, escorted us to our table. It was exactly where I expected it to be, with a perfect view of the booth where Durant and Lara were already ensconced, as if in their own little world, hidden from the rest of the restaurant. Their hands were intertwined on the snow-white tablecloth, their heads bent towards each other in a confidential intimacy, and I felt the rage that I had extinguished for so long flare up inside me like a match. I forced myself to look down and focus on Felice, trying to get used to the image of a businesswoman discussing a joint project, but every time I involuntarily glanced towards the booth over and over again, I saw Durant, pouring champagne, bending over and whispering something in Lara's ear, the very thing, something that was once meant only for me, and her light, sincere laughter, which broke out in response, like a lash, lashed at my naked soul. "So, tell me about this executive series," Felice said, carefully unwrapping the napkin, and his voice brought me back to reality. I clung to his words like a lifeline, and began, clearly and methodically, to explain the idea of an interdisciplinary course linking architecture and economics, a topic in which I invested not only knowledge, but also my heart. I talked about the potential of the new educational format, the importance of understanding spatial thinking for managers, how form affects function, and how the environment shapes thinking. But at that moment, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed how my husband's hand, the same hand with which he once held me, was now lying on Lara's bare knee under the table, and it became difficult for me to breathe. "Martin?" Felice's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I replied too quickly and reached for the glass of water to hide the trembling in my fingers. "I'm just a little tired. End of semester, pressure." Felice nodded understandingly and, without asking any questions, went on to talk about his latest project, a sustainable residential complex in the city center, where he planned to combine green technologies, the local community and architectural aesthetics into a single organic space. His passion was real, and at any other time I would have listened, genuinely interested, but today my thoughts were still in another part of the room, in another reality. And so Lara got up from the table. Probably to the bathroom. I felt my heart skip a beat. It was a chance. Not deliberate, not calculated, but the only one. I leaned over to Felice. "Excuse me for a minute," and he stood up with a polite smile, showing his respect, not even suspecting that at that moment, 20 feet away from us, his wife, his trust, his idea of the world was crumbling with every step. I didn't know what exactly I was going to do, but my feet were already carrying me through the hall, through the soft light, the aroma of food and the hum of conversation, straight to her. We met at the entrance to the women's room. Her look, as soon as she recognized me, gave everything away. For a moment, recognition was reflected in her beautiful face, and not just recognition, fear, confusion, shame. She saw my photos on Durant's desk, on the walls of his office. Without a doubt. "You're Durant's wife," she said faintly. "And you're Felice's wife," I replied, nodding slightly toward the table where he was still sitting with his back to us, not knowing, not seeing, not feeling how fragile the edifice of his life was. The blood drained from her face, turning it as white as porcelain. Looking back, I realized that I was preparing for this meeting from the very second I saw the message on Durant's phone. I replayed possible scenes, dialogue options, and lines in my head, but what happened wasn't any of them. "Please," Laura whispered, her eyes darting from me to Felice. "Not here." "Why not here?" My voice was cold, venomously calm. "Isn't this the perfect place? Beautiful restaurant, romantic lighting. You obviously liked it." Lara's perfectly manicured hand reached out, as if wanting not so much to stop me as to regain some semblance of control over the situation, grabbing my hand with unexpected strength, which felt panic, despair and, perhaps, a drop of guilt. "Martine, I can explain," she whispered, and there was a thin, painful tremor in her voice, betraying her inner unpreparedness for what was happening. "Can you do it?" I asked without raising my voice, but there was a heaviness in each word, as if they were carved from granite. I carefully, with deliberate slowness, removed her palm, feeling her fingers cling to my skin in a last attempt to hold on to the crumbling. "Can you explain why you're having an affair with my husband?" I continued, as if ritually, like a surgeon opening a wound to reveal the depth of a festering lie. "Can you explain why you are betraying this man, who, apparently, still has no idea what is happening just a few meters away from him?" Her eyes, large, brown, with long eyelashes, trembled and filled with tears, which she desperately tried to hold back, as if they fell, everything would become undeniably real. "It's complicated," she whispered. "It always happens that way, doesn't it?" I smiled sadly, ironically, almost without malice. Love, marriage, and fidelity are such complicated concepts. Especially when things don't go according to the script. Behind her fragile shoulders, against the background of the soft, subdued light of the restaurant, I saw Durant finally notice our tense interaction. His face changed in the same second, the color instantly drained from his cheeks. He abruptly rose from the booth, like a puppet, not knowing what to do, to approach and intervene or disappear into the same gap through which our lives were slipping away. "What do you want?" Laura asked, and her voice was no longer steady. It was trembling like fine porcelain on the verge of breaking. This question took me by surprise, because I really didn't know what exactly I wanted: revenge, justice, or just to talk it out. "I need honesty," I finally said, and those 3 words, simple in form, turned out to be much more weighty than lengthy accusations. My marriage has been missing something for longer than I thought. Not just passion or attention. I missed the real, uncluttered truth. I turned around and saw that Felice, who was still sitting at our table, was now watching us with an expression of bewilderment and alarm. His high forehead was furrowed, there was a question in his eyes, and his lips were pressed into a thin line, as if he was preparing to hear something that would change his life. "Your husband seems like a good man," I said, looking at Lara. "Did he deserve it?" Lara's face scrunched up in pain, as if I had physically hit her. "No," she gasped, barely audible. "He doesn't deserve this." "Me too," I replied, and at that moment, as if on cue, Durant appeared behind her. He approached with the air of a man caught in the eye of a storm he had caused. His face was distorted with panic, and his voice sounded hoarse, strained. "Martina, what are you doing here?" "We're having dinner," I said simply, not even trying to hide my sarcasm. "Just like you." "It's not like that," he began, hurrying to find the words, but I didn't give him time. "What does it look like?" I finished for him. "Durant, please. We have already passed this stage a long time ago. Meaningless denials, ridiculous excuses, They were appropriate at the very beginning. Not anymore. And at that moment, when the tension in the air became almost physically palpable, Felice came up to us. He stopped at our place with an expression of concern in which a hunch was beginning to awaken. "Martine, is everything okay? Do you know these people? What is it?" he asked, trying not to lose his politeness. This moment froze like a photograph, all four of them, like the participants of the scene, suddenly caught in the spotlight, deprived of the opportunity to leave. I felt like I was holding a lever in my hands that could destroy their comfortable, deceitful world with a single movement. And I could do that, crush them, expose them, leave them among the rubble. But something else was already being born inside of me, more subtle and cold, the realization that a real blow does not require noise. "Felice," I said with exaggerated calm, "I would like to introduce you to my husband, Grant Hamilton." His face tensed, and then, as if on a flash, he shifted his gaze to Lara. "And I think you already know Lara," I added quietly. The pause that followed these words was agonizing. The realization that came to Felice was like a blow. Confusion turned to shock, and then that devastating, crushing realization was reflected in his eyes. He straightened up, but it seemed that his body had become heavier, as if every word he uttered now had cut into his flesh. "Lara," he said, and his voice was full of pain, barely contained. "How long?" No one answered. Silence became an answer equal to 1,000 confessions. I expected this moment to bring me relief and satisfaction, but instead I felt only emptiness and heaviness. Looking at Felice's face, I recognized my own pain. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private place," I suggested, feeling other people's gazes begin to gather around us, curious, tactless, sticky. Durant found his voice again. "Then, Martine, please listen to me. We need to discuss this." "Of course you do," I replied. "But not here. And not just the two of us." The head waiter approached, sensing the tension, like a professional conductor who has caught a false note in an orchestra. "Is everything okay with your lunch?" "What is it?" he asked with perfect politeness. I nodded and smiled, maybe for the first time all evening, really. In fact, we suddenly had a change of plans. "Could you combine our bookings? I think the four of us need to talk." He shifted his gaze between us, hiding his surprise behind an impeccable mask of professionalism. "Of course, madam. Over here." He led us into a separate dining room, carefully chosen for such conversations, intimate, with soft lighting, and fenced off from the main hall by heavy doors, behind which the whispers, glances, and flickering of other people's candles disappeared, away from prying eyes, and quickly set the table for four, politely arranging glasses and cutlery with such attention, as if it were the most mundane dinner, and not a battlefield. "I'll give you some time to sort out the menu," he said with a delicate intonation, stepping back with professional grace and closing the door behind him, leaving us alone with his dumb truth and the silence in which all our sins now weighed. We sat in painful silence, as if every word that could be uttered weighed in stone, Durant and Lara on one side of the table, huddled tightly together like allies in a lost battle, and Felice and I on the other, silent judges, witnesses of their fall, separated not only by the distance between the chairs, but also in a chasm that no one could bridge anymore. The symbolic separation did not escape the attention of any of us. It was as obvious as a fault line, and just as fragile, ready to open up at any second. "How do you know?" Durant finally asked me, breaking this ringing pause in a voice that sounded less like hope than a desperate attempt to understand exactly how his illusion of control had collapsed. "Does it matter?" I replied coldly, looking straight into his eyes, which were frozen in an intense attempt to read in me not anger, but maybe even the possibility of salvation. "I guess not," he admitted, lowering his gaze, and for the first time in all this time, he showed uncertainty. Felice hadn't said a word yet. His eyes were fixed on his wife, and that look was so piercing that Lara, as if physically sensing him, averted her eyes, as if she wanted to disappear for a moment. "Were you ever going to tell me? What is it?" He finally asked her in a restrained voice, but his voice was trembling, and my fingers, clenched into a fist in my lap, were trembling. Lara's mascara left dark streaks on her pale cheeks, turning her face into a silent picture of remorse. I do not know, she whispered weakly, as if the answer was beyond her control. That's the problem with cheating, I said, feeling the words tear the air. They exist in a fantasy world where no one owes anything, where there are no consequences, no solutions, no future, just a moment distorted by passion and lies, until reality, as always, comes and turns it around. That's it. Durant looked at me with a kind of surprise, almost reproach. You're very calm about it, he said. What did you expect, Durant? I leaned forward so he could hear every word. That I'll throw a glass of wine in your face, make a scene so that you can later, at an opportunity, tell me how your crazy wife threw a tantrum and finally gained the moral right to leave for your beloved? He had the decency not to argue, just to lower his eyes, like a schoolboy caught cheating. I had 3 days to think about it, I continued, and my voice was as smooth as ice. 3 days during which I looked back at the 15 years of our life together, remembering all those small moments when you chose to lie, when you looked away, when you preferred to remain silent because the truth seemed too uncomfortable to you. 3 days? Laura jerked her head up, as if I'd said something incredible. Have you known for 3 days now? And, did you arrange all this in advance? An ambush? I turned to her and answered without malice, but with the clarity that leaves no room for error. Yes. I knew it. And do you know what the most interesting thing is? During these 3 days, none of you even suspected that something was wrong. Durant, you came home every night, kissed me on the cheek, as always, asked a question that you didn't expect an answer to, and told me about dinner with a client with your usual ease. Without the slightest shadow of guilt. It's like everything is the same. I didn't mean to hurt you, he muttered, and there was a weak, futile attempt at justification in his voice. Felice suddenly laughed, short, hoarse, bitter, and there was no relief in that laugh, but tragic recognition. It's rich. You didn't want to hurt her while you were sleeping with my wife? Convenient logic. Just wonderful. At that moment, the waiter knocked and entered with water and bread, carefully arranging the plates, but, sensing the atmosphere, he immediately retreated, as if realizing that he had accidentally witnessed a scene in which he did not belong. I planned this confrontation to the last touch. I booked the right table, invited Felice, timed it perfectly, as if by notes. But nothing could have prepared me for what this moment would really be like, how heavy the weight of all these lies weighs on my chest, how painful it is to realize that my marriage has been a decoration for much longer than I admitted to myself. What's going to happen now? Laura asked, barely audible, as if afraid to wake up the remnants of a ruined life. I silently reached into my purse, took out the room key and put it on the table in front of me. I've booked a room in the hotel across the street, I explained calmly. I'm not sleeping in our bed tonight, Durant. He looked like I'd hit him with something heavy. Martine, no. He began, but I interrupted him. I'm not done yet, I said. For 15 years, I've been everything to you, a wife, a friend, an ally, whose life was being rebuilt to fit your career. I put my ambitions and desires on the back burner. I forgave your absence. I believed your excuses. It ends today. I put the key on the table as the last chord, as the final touch of this symphony of betrayal, and stood up. Felice, I said to him with sincere regret, I'm sorry that you found out about it this way. You deserve to be honest. He nodded, still digesting the new reality that was now his. I turned to Durant. I'm at my sister's place this weekend. When I get back on Monday, I expect that you will no longer be in the house. Take whatever you think is necessary. We'll discuss the rest later. Are you kicking me out? What is it? He asked incredulously. No, Durant. You kicked yourself out the moment you decided that our marriage vows could be interpreted according to your mood. I looked at Lara. It's yours now. Enjoy. No more secret meetings. No more thrills from the forbidden. Just the mundane. Only reality. This is the reality of a person who betrays his obligations as soon as they cease to be convenient, not because he cannot do otherwise, but because he decides that he can afford it. With these words, I headed for the door, feeling my every step echo in the marble silence of the hall, but stopped as soon as my hand touched the cold bronze handle. I turned around for a moment, lingering my gaze on the still shocked couple, whose mutual glances no longer expressed passion, only reproach, fear, and a premonition of the impending consequences. "Oh, and dinner on Duren's corporate card," I said with an irony that needed no more explanation. "It seems that you are both familiar with this agreement." No one answered. Their silence was more eloquent than any excuse. I left the restaurant with my head held high, overcoming that short but symbolically important path through the lobby, like a queen who renounces the crown for which she no longer wants to fight, overtook her car in the parking lot queue, not feeling tired, not giving tears the opportunity to show in front of strangers, and turning the corner, I crossed the street to the Grand Meridian Hotel, to the temporary harbor that I had set for myself for this night, a night in which there would be no sleep, but freedom. It was only when I got to my room, a spacious, exquisitely decorated suite with panoramic windows through which the evening city stretched to the horizon, sparkling with millions of lights, like stars indifferent to someone else's pain, that I finally allowed myself to burst into tears. Not with those restrained tears that roll down my cheeks in the movies, not with those neat sobs that can be stilled with a handkerchief and a cup of tea, but with deep, primal, body-shaking waves of pain, as if all those years that I endured, forgave, explained, deceived myself, believing that love flowed out of me. It's hard work and patience, and that everything will definitely return to normal. I cried because of the marriage I thought I had, because of the memories that are now forever tinged with the bitter tones of betrayal, because of plans that no longer made sense. I don't know how much time I spent like this, sitting on the floor, leaning against the bed, allowing myself to be weak, finally not being strong, because being strong became unbearable. When the storm passed, it left behind a strange feeling, not relief, no, but clarification, like after a thunderstorm, when the earth smells fresh and you suddenly begin to see a road that previously seemed impossible. A soft, almost inaudible knock on the door startled me. I got up, automatically wiping my eyes with the palm of my hand, and, going to the door, looked through the peephole, already prepared for the fact that Durant would not give up so easily. But it wasn't him. Felice Rossetti was standing in front of the door, looking like he'd been through the same circles of hell as me and was now just looking for a place to catch his breath. I opened the door a crack. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, and there was such simple human pain in it that I felt my heart tighten. "I just couldn't go home. I didn't know where else to go." I hesitated only for a moment. Everything that once separated us, positions, subordination, distance, lost all meaning that evening. We were equal in our vulnerability, in a loss that we had not yet fully realized. "How did you know where to find me?" I asked, taking a step back and opening the door wider. He shrugged his shoulders. "You mentioned that you would cross the street. I thought maybe you were at the Grand Meridian. There was only one way to find out." I asked at the reception if Martina Hamilton had checked in. They said yes. He hesitated. "I could hint that I'm your husband." I shook my head, smiling a little through the remnants of tears. "Under other circumstances, I probably would have been worried," I replied. "But today, we're just two people who've been through the same thing." "Come in," I invited him, waving my hand. "I'm afraid I look terrible." I pointed to my swollen face, the smudges of mascara that had spread under my eyes. "Join the club," he replied with a sad but sincere smile, in which there was no mockery, only sympathy. His own eyes were red, and his shoulders were slightly slouched, like a man who suddenly found life twice as difficult. We sat in two high armchairs by the window, and for a few minutes we just sat in silence, looking out at the evening city, the very city where everyone lives their own personal drama, unaware that someone is also sitting in an armchair on the floor below, experiencing their own catastrophe. "Did you know?" "What is it?" he finally asked. "I mean, before I got this message. Did you suspect?" I sighed. To be honest, yes. Somewhere inside, I knew. He's changed. He became more distant, annoyed, as if I was bothering him with something. But I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe it. Felice nodded. Lara, she started staying late at work a lot. She said she was going with her friends for the weekend. And I believed her. He was silent for a moment. That's what makes them so effective, right? They are trading on our trust. I nodded, feeling the phrase echo inside me. What are you going to do now? He asked. I took a deep breath. What I've already said. I won't take him back. Not because I can't forgive, but because I realize that he made this choice consciously. This is not a one-night stand. This is a year-long betrayal. Felice grimaced. A year? He asked softly. Oh, my God. I looked at him, feeling a wave of sympathy rise in my chest. And you? I asked softly. He ran his hands through his hair. I don't know. We've been married for 7 years. There are no children, and it's probably for the best, but still. He paused, looking out the window. I don't have to decide everything right now. But I know one thing, I will no longer be able to discern what I have already seen. His voice trembled, and there was so much authenticity in that tremor that, without hesitation, I reached out and took his hand. It was a simple movement that required no explanation, a gesture that contained a human connection, as necessary as air, as warmth, as a reminder that even in the darkest hour we are not alone. Around midnight, Felice went to his hotel room, leaving behind that rare silence that comes only after a long, exhaustive conversation, not comforting, not resolving, but giving the opportunity to face the truth without fear. We talked for hours, and the topic of infidelity was not the only one. On the contrary, it only opened the gates to that deep, rarely accessible layer of communication, where there are confessions not only about pain, but also about hopes, about what did not come true, about dreams long hidden in the drawers of maturity and responsibilities. Two strangers, caught on the edge of their lives, suddenly found a strange, unexpected closeness, intertwined by a common experience of loss, a common silence, and an equally broken trust. And when he left, for the first time in a long time, I felt not loneliness, but his rare antipode, the feeling that you really understood. The next morning, I woke up to a desperate, rough, almost furious knocking on the door, as if someone on the other side was trying to destroy not only the barrier of wood and metal, but also the walls that I had begun to build inside myself overnight. Durant was standing in the doorway, unshaven, gloomy, and wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in the day before, as if time hadn't moved for him since the minute I left the restaurant. His lips were trembling and his eyes were darting, and he said my name not as a greeting, but as a plea. Martine, please, we need to talk. The words fell from his lips like drops from leaves after a rainstorm. I let him in, keeping the distance between us, not a step, not a meter, but the whole abyss that opened between us with his first betrayal. Did you come alone? I asked coldly. Or is Lara waiting downstairs in the car? He flinched as if he'd been slapped. It's over. I finished it last night. It was a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. I didn't answer right away. I watched him, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, his eyes avoiding mine, and finally I said, a strange mistake. A year long. His face contorted, and he stammered, do you know how long? I nodded. I saw everything, Durant. Messages. Travel plans disguised as business trips. The apartment you watched together. Did you really think that all this could be hidden? He sank into a chair as if his legs had buckled under him. It wasn't real. What happened between Lara and me was a fantasy. An illusion. It didn't matter. I crossed my arms over my chest. And it makes everything better? I asked. No. Of course not. But, Martine, 15 years old. 15 years of living together. You can't just throw it away. I looked at him for a long time and slowly. No, I'm not throwing it away. You did it every time you lied, when you chose her, when you left and came back pretending that everything was fine. I just admit that I don't want to be a part of this lie anymore. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with despair. I'll do anything. Therapy. Complete openness. Everything you need. I studied the man I once loved unconditionally, trying to reconcile the image that lives in my memory with the one who sat in front of me, and each time betrayed everything that was between us. What has really changed, Durant? I asked calmly. You don't regret that you had an affair. You're sorry you got caught. He shook his head. It is not true. I felt guilty. I was going to end it all. I narrowed my eyes. When? Before or after a trip to Cabo that you have already booked? Before or after the deposit for the apartment was paid? He leaned back, his face wrinkled as if in pain. How can I fix this? I answered quietly, but with that firmness that comes only when my heart is no longer trembling with doubt. No way. Some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. They can only be recognized and left behind. He paused. For a moment, everything in the room seemed to freeze, even the air. Then he whispered, Are you really done with me? Just like that? I grinned, not out of irony, but out of exhaustion. No, Durant. For a reason. After a year of convincing me that everything was fine, even though you were building a life with another woman behind my back, no, it's not easy. He abruptly changed his tone. What about our friends? Families? How do you imagine the awkwardness, the scandal, the shame? I raised my eyebrows. Is that what's bothering you? Not my feelings, not our trust, not our story, but embarrassment in front of others. Our reputation, he corrected, and it sounded almost pathetic. We were an exemplary couple. People respected us. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. I've already taken care of that. I called your mother this morning. He turned pale. You didn't do it. I did. And your sister. And Mark and Sarah. I've told you everything. In detail. He jumped up as if from a blow. You had no right. Had no right to tell the truth. I objected. I've spent years helping you build the perfect image. I won't let you turn me into the villain in your story. He took a step towards the door, but stopped, staring at the phone, which suddenly rang. I saw him glance at the screen and immediately look away, as if there was something shameful about him. Is this Lara? I asked calmly. Are you bored already? He didn't answer. And you didn't have to. Everything was clear. Go, I said. She needs you more than I do right now. After he left, I was left alone in my hotel room, expecting to finally be able to breathe freely, to feel safe, at home, when nothing threatens my body, mind, or heart, exhausted by months of doubt, anxiety, and distrust. However, instead of the welcome, familiar cozy emptiness that I expected when a person is left alone in silence after a loud storm, I felt something completely different, something unexpected, even frightening in its clarity, relief, deep, almost physical, as if a heavy burden that I was carrying had suddenly been lifted from my shoulders. For so long that I had already stopped noticing how much she had distorted my posture and confused my steps. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I could straighten up, straighten my shoulders and breathe deeply, without fear that every word, every look, every movement would be disassembled, distorted, and used against me by the one I called my life partner. The phone rang, breaking this newfound silence, but without causing annoyance. On the contrary, the sound seemed warm and familiar to me, as if it brought light with it through the half-closed curtains. Martine, Felice's voice answered on the other end, and there was no demanding or empathy in it, just caring, gentle and unobtrusive. I just wanted to check on you, he continued. How are you holding up? I smiled through a slight haze of fatigue and, to my surprise, answered almost without hesitation, better than I expected. I told him that Durant had come, that he had tried to say something, that he had tried to persuade, lied, and regretted again, as usual, according to his script. He said that Lara doesn't stop calling him, I added. I didn't answer, I just watched. Felice paused and exhaled softly. What are you going to do? I thought about it, even though I knew the answer last night, when I first allowed myself to admit, I no longer want to be the one who agrees to less. I deserve more than to be with someone who can systematically lie to my face, I said. Yes, he confirmed. You really deserve better. And then suddenly he asked, have you had breakfast? His voice became a little lighter, almost playful. I could use a friendly expression this morning. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes were swollen, but there was a new clarity in my gaze, a calm determination that I had lacked for so long. Breakfast sounds perfect, I replied, and with that simple decision, something new began. The following weeks turned into a series of official conversations, visits to lawyers, discussions about the terms of the division of property, and endless attempts to decompose the common life into separate, legally alienated elements. Durant did not leave quietly. One minute he was appealing to my memory, to our past, the next he was accusing me of cruelty, of being unable to forgive one mistake, which, in his opinion, could not erase everything. But I held on firmly, with a new strength that I seemed to have dug up inside myself, like an old jewel covered in the dust of doubt and sacrifice. Laura, as mutual friends informed me, left the city a month later, unable to withstand the disapproving stares, the whispers behind her back, and the icy indifference of those who had previously nodded affably at her at public events. Durant, as it turned out, was trying to keep the relationship going, clinging to Laura as his last support, but the illusion that had previously seemed like salvation to him could not withstand the weight of reality. Meanwhile, Felice and I continued to see each other, first out of a need to share our pain, to hear a response, to understand that you are not alone in your despair, and then more and more often, simply because it was easier and brighter together, and conversation stopped being just about the past. We started talking about the future. I've never really thanked you, he said one warm summer evening, as we walked along the embankment, and the water reflected the sunset gold, turning an ordinary day into an almost cinematic moment. I was surprised. For having the courage to tell the truth. For not turning away. You could have. Everyone would have an excuse for that. I shook my head. I didn't feel brave then. More like desperate. He chuckled. No matter how you feel, you saved me. If it weren't for you, I would still be living a lie, in the comfort of self-deception. Time has passed, and what started as a temporary shelter has become something more solid. Thanks to the destruction of my marriage, I gained not only a new life, but also myself. I regained respect for myself, for my voice, and learned to distinguish between who is really next to me and who is waiting for the first opportunity. Are you happy, Martine? Felice asked one day as we stood at the railing, watching the boat glide through the water. I didn't lie. Not always. There are days when I mourn what I thought I had. A future that seemed so real. But most of all, I'm grateful for the truth. For the fact that now I can build my life on something real, and not on a convenient illusion. So, for the truth, he said, gently squeezing my hand. And I thought about the woman I was, the one who sat in a hotel room and believed her life was over. Now I knew it was just beginning. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.